Why do we enjoy art that makes us miserable? Think about intense cinematic masterpieces like The Conjuring, Trainspotting, Rosemary's Baby, or Dunstan Checks In. People love these movies, and they do because they're so effective at making us feel sad, scared, or any number of negative emotions that we typically try to avoid. Philosophers refer to this as the paradox of tragedy, or why we actively seek out art that makes us miserable. And it's generated centuries of discussion in the field of aesthetics. But as I'll suggest at the end of the video, and I could be wrong, the solution may be more scientific than philosophical. This is Frank Philosophy, and today we'll be speaking frankly about the paradox of tragedy. So the classic version of the paradox comes from the philosopher David Hume. He wrote the following in his 1757 essay called Of Tragedy. It seems an unaccountable pleasure which the spectators of a well-written tragedy receive from sorrow, terror, anxiety, and other passions that are in themselves disagreeable and uneasy. The more they are touched and affected, the more they are delighted with the spectacle. Now, Hume was talking about tragedy in the context of a play, or a drama. They didn't have horror movies and video games back then, but the point still stands. People watching tragedies back then or horror movies today seem to enjoy them more the more the characters on the screen suffer. The more touched and affected we get by what's happening on the screen or on the stage, the more we enjoy it. He called this an unaccountable pleasure, meaning that it just doesn't make sense that we would feel this way. Since in most cases when we feel these emotions, it's a bad thing, and we try to avoid those situations. But in the context of a play or a film, it's not enjoyable in spite of the emotional pain of sadness or horror. It's enjoyable because of that pain. And this is weird. And it's weirder than having regular old mixed feelings about something. Imagine you're playing some winter sport, like skiing or something, and your fingers are freezing. And you're miserable about how cold your hands are, but you're having fun doing the sport all the same. So you have the joy of skiing or sledding or whatever it is, mixed with the pain of having nearly frozen fingers. But these are just two completely different feelings associated with the same activity. If your fingertips weren't freezing and causing you pain, you'd probably enjoy skiing just as much. Probably more. But horror and tragedy are different. The bad feelings are part of what makes the experience enjoyable and satisfying. And I'm sure most of us would agree that horror or drama without those accompanying negative emotions wouldn't be the same. I mean, what would a horror movie be without genuinely scary scenes? What would a good drama be without an awful thing happening to a beloved character? It would just be boring and not very fun to watch. So there seems to be an intrinsic connection between our engagement with a piece of art and the bad feelings that they generate. So the paradox boils down to three claims that each is obviously true on its own, but it seems like they can't be true all at once. The first is that watching effective horror or tragedy makes us feel negative emotions. The second is that we don't enjoy feeling negative emotions. And the third is that we enjoy watching things like horror and tragedy. One of these statements has to give, and that's the paradox. And so philosophers have offered different theories of how these seemingly incompatible claims can actually go together. So what we'll do is walk through the options, and then I'll give my take at the end. So one possible solution is called the compensatory or the trade-off view. The idea is that yes, horror and tragedy hurt, they feel bad when we're watching them, but we get something good out of it. Our emotional pain is just the price of admission. To give an analogy, think about sports. When you go on a long run or push yourself through a brutal workout, your body feels genuine pain. Your lungs hurt, your legs shake, every part of you wants to stop. It takes effort to work through the pain and get to the end of the workout. But eventually, at some point during the workout, your brain starts pumping out endorphins and serotonin. Your body chemically rewards you for pushing through the discomfort. And this is well understood biology. Discomfort, in the right situation, triggers a reward response. And some people even get addicted to it. Marathon runners are not masochists, they've just gained access to a chemical reward system that pays serious mental and physical dividends for targeted suffering. And so maybe something like this is going on in the context of emotional suffering in art. Sure, we feel bad when we watch the sad story, but maybe we get something else out of it. Maybe we feel genuine pleasure in how the story is told. Or maybe we feel a sense of release or relief, like what Aristotle calls catharsis. Or maybe we get something more cognitive or intellectual. Maybe we gain insight into human nature, or we get a sense of feeling deeply moved or some other higher order pleasure. But whatever we get in return, the idea is just that the bad feeling is the price. It's the cost. And whatever we get back is just worth it. Now, this is a pretty good explanation, I think, but it's not perfect. And I think the biggest problem is just that it doesn't really track how we typically talk about our enjoyment of horror and drama. We don't usually say that we enjoyed a horror movie because we got something else other than the fear out of it. Usually we say we love a good horror movie because it's scary. In other words, we love the unpleasantness directly, not because it gives us something else. So again, the trade-off view is tempting, but it might be missing something essential about why we actually enjoy horror and drama. Another solution concerns our distance from the events happening on stage or screen. Horror and tragedy in media doesn't hurt in the same way as real-life suffering simply because we can't be touched by it. The philosopher Edmund Burke wrote in 1757 that when danger or pain presses too nearly, they are incapable of giving any delight, and are simply terrible. But at certain distances, and with certain modifications, they may be, and they are, delightful, as we every day experience. So the idea is that even though we feel genuine sadness and fear when we're watching something on screen, we know that it's fake. We know that it can't actually hurt us. We know that it can't affect us. We know we're not at risk. We can turn off the TV, close the laptop, or pause the game. Our distance between the events on screen and our own lives softens the blow. And it makes the bad feelings tolerable, even enjoyable. The problem I have with this view is the metaphor of distance. Because you would think that if suffering was distant from us, it wouldn't be able to affect us immediately. And yet, we actively seek out media that does just this. The more immersive a work of art is, the better we think it does its job. The scarier something is, the more fear we feel, the more likely we are to enjoy it as a work of art. Another potential wrinkle here is the idea of true crime or true tragedy. For many of us, and speaking for myself here, true crime documentaries and horror stories based on true events seem to hit harder than just pure fantasy. And they hit harder because they're much closer than any fictional story. The thrill that there might be a criminal mastermind walking among us and we have no idea is kind of part of what makes true crime and that sort of media enjoyable. So again, if distance is the metaphor, then the idea that the closer it is to reality, the better is kind of weird. But there's definitely something to the observation that part of our brain knows that we're safe. And I think this might be key to the puzzle. It's not that the horror or sadness isn't real, it's just that it can't touch us. And that safety is part of what makes it enjoyable. We'll come back to this later. A third possibility is the idea of transforming emotions. David Hume suggests this in his essay. The idea is that the feelings of pain and sorrow somehow transform into pleasure. There is some sort of emotional alchemy. Grief and fear walk in, and something enjoyable walks out. But the problem is that this doesn't really answer anything. It just sort of transforms the puzzle. Because how does one emotion transform into another? I mean, does sadness and grief become pleasure, or does it just get replaced by pleasure? This idea of transformation is really doing a lot of work, and it's underspecified how it's actually supposed to be done. A final solution is the revisionary take. This says that maybe the bad feelings that we supposedly feel aren't actually bad feelings. So even though we think that we're sad when our favorite character dies, we're really not sad. It's a fake kind of sadness. The real kind of sadness would come when a pet or a family member dies. And clearly there's a huge difference between that happening and our favorite character dying on TV. And the idea is that this difference is so big that it just means that we're actually experiencing a different emotion in these two different situations. So maybe the sadness and fear that's directed at fantasy and fiction isn't real sadness and fear after all. It's something else. But again, this really isn't a satisfying answer. Instead, it's kind of a cop-out. We're just changing the definition of fear and sadness so we don't actually have to solve the problem. Instead, now we have a new emotion to explain. Fake fear and fake sadness. But this fake fear and fake sadness feels pretty real. I mean, our hearts really pound during horror films, and we really do cry during sad scenes in drama movies. Calling it pretend doesn't really help us to understand why we seek out feeling this way. Okay, so now we're clear on the paradox, and we've gone through a couple standard replies and their potential problems. Here's what I think. Basically, my take is that the paradox of tragedy might be one of those philosophy problems that we're better off turning to science to solve. Specifically, neuroscience. And it's only a philosophical problem because people like David Hume didn't have access to contemporary neuroscience. Because once we understand what's going on in the brain when we're watching horror or drama, it's easier to understand why we want to do it in the first place. Because the whole paradox depends on a sneaky assumption based into the way that we set it up. It depends on a unified subject of experience that can't accept contradictory feelings. The single unitary I that doesn't enjoy these feelings normally, but does enjoy them in a fictional setting. But this picture of the self is just wrong, or at least it's way too clean. Your brain and your mind isn't just one unified thing. It's a massive parallel processing system with dozens of regions running their own jobs at the same time, and they often pull in different directions and come together in our conscious experience. And the fact that different parts of the brain influence our conscious experience differently leads to all sorts of fascinating and sometimes strange and contradictory experiences. And so I think our experience of horror and sadness and drama is something like this. I mean, think about drugs and alcohol. These things are all technically poison. They damage our bodies and shorten our lives. We all know this. But they also hijack the brain's pleasure system, and that's why people take them. We eat junk food when we're already full. We scroll our phones when we want to go to sleep. We keep watching the news that's making us anxious. But none of that is particularly mysterious because we know the brain chemistry that makes it work. You know, dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, and all the rest of it. It's just multiple brain and body systems running all at once with different priorities and in ways that were much less common during our early evolutionary history. So I think the same thing is happening when we watch things like horror and tragedy. And there's science to back this up. When you watch a horror scene, for example, your amygdala, the fear center, fires up. You get an adrenaline rush. Your heart rate goes up. Your body even releases endorphins. That's just what happens when you feel afraid. But here's the key. The prefrontal cortex, the rational part of your brain, knows that the situation is not real. It knows you're safe. And it applies a kind of safety brake. So you get the chemical high of the danger response without actually fearing for your life. Again, it's because we know we're safe. This is why kids can't handle scary movies. Their prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed, so they can't apply the filter that this isn't real and feel safe anyway. It's just their amygdala firing on all cylinders. That's why they're terrified. And it's the same situation in sadness and tragedy. The brain circuits that handle real grief are getting stimulated. They're getting activated by the story. But the rational layer keeps it bracketed. You get the intensity, the sense of deep emotional engagement, the meaningfulness of it, without the actual loss, because cognitively we know that we're not actually losing someone or something. So now when we look back at the paradox of tragedy, we can see that the way that it's phrased might be causing all the problems. We feel bad, we don't enjoy feeling bad, but we enjoy the experience. The problem here might be the word we. There's no single unified self that's stuck in a contradiction. There's a brain with a fear system, a reward system, and a rational system. And they're all just firing in different directions. And none of them care what philosophers think about what we supposedly can and can't experience without being in contradiction. So yeah, sometimes the best way to solve a philosophical problem is just to wait for science to come along and solve it for us. Okay, so to recap, the paradox of tragedy is just the puzzle that we seem to enjoy media that makes us feel bad. And that's kind of weird. There's some pretty standard moves to try and respond to this paradox, like maybe we get something out of the pain, or maybe the distance between us and the events on screen softens the pain, or maybe the pain somehow transforms into pleasure, or maybe it isn't really pain. But my take is that the puzzle was just built on a bad assumption. Our brains and our conscious experience just isn't unified in the way that would make this an actual contradiction. And neuroscience makes this very clear. There are just different systems in the brain that are doing different jobs, and they come together to form experiences that we weirdly kind of enjoy. But what do you think about the paradox of tragedy? Do you agree that neuroscience can probably solve it for us? Or do you think that maybe I'm being uncharitable and there's more to some of the responses than I've been able to give them credit for in this video? Let me know in the comments below. But at any rate, thanks for watching. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more Frank Philosophy.